book, volume 15. It's page 200 in this version, but it's Parshas Chaisar, the fifth sicha, and we're on chapter 4. So he says like this: Hezber Shlishi. The Rebbe offers a novel interpretation of what the menorah miracle actually was. It was a miracle that had two opposites at the same time. So Rebbe says maybe we can try another option, but ofen nes Chanukah, in the manner of the Chanukah miracle. And if we bring this answer, we will elude those difficulties that we had in the first two. And we'll suddenly solve with this new description of the miracle why this is a novel miracle that we didn't find already before, neither by the Sarah and Rivka or by Elisha. That such a miracle of lights actually never took place before, thus eliciting a holiday to be made out of it, its celebration. So he says, Kamuva la'el mi Beis Yosef. We brought before in the Beis Yosef, Nasen Neis Chanuka lefi achas adeos, bofen shenasnu kol Hashem beneros, beboker matzu aneros meleim shemen. So let's start off with a quote from the Beis Yosef that the miracle was such that they put oil into the candles, and in the morning they found that the candles were full, right? So this would seem to imply the quantitative miracle, right? If they were full, how'd they get full? So there must be more oil, right? But the Rebbe is saying that doesn't actually say there was more oil. It just says they came the next day, they found the candles were full. How else would it be that there wasn't miraculous in quantity? Yesh lomar, so we could say he wants to say that it wasn't. The explanation is not that the oil burned down and afterwards the oil was miraculously replenished by miracle. But rather we're going to say, and this is the new miracle, that the oil burned down, but together with this, none of the oil lacked. So in other words, it was burning, and at the same time, the oil was not being reduced. That's why they came the next morning and found it full. It's not because it burned down and it miraculously replenished. It's because when it was burning, it never went down in the first place.
Oh, wow.
And we find already there is an example of something called the fire from heaven, right? Which we know regarding Shimon's burning bush. It was actually Hashem's burning bush, but Shimon called it. That there was such a fire which, so to speak, burned but did not consume. Remember, that was the whole chiddush with Moshe Rabbeinu when he came across this burning bush. That was the great revelation which made him turn and see what's going on, what's so special about this. What is so special about a bush on fire? Nothing really, except when he turned and saw the bush was on fire and yet the wood was not being consumed. That was the miracle that Hashem introduced himself to Moshe Rabbeinu with. And he says that even if you want to say that it's possible to light the menorah with oil that was miraculous oil, that we said it's not actually olive oil, but Hashem made it with all the properties of Shem and olive oil, like we said before. Even if you want to say that, nonetheless it's understood. Right? Right? It says that even that withstanding the light, the fire of the menorah, it still has to come from what's called shemen lama'or, which means light, oil to illuminate. So it comes out that this nes contained inside of it something together with its opposite. In other words, I guess what he's saying there, I'm not exactly sure, but
consumption and non-consumption at the same time.
No, that we can understand, so to speak, we can understand that. But what's he trying to say here? Even if you want to say that the oil was made by a miracle, but it was with all the properties of oil, right? בכל זאת מובן שאור המנורה צריך להיות כזה הבא מן השמן למאור.
Is it because they physically lit it and it wasn't like a divine fire that came at first? It was an actual fire?
Hold on a second.
Footnotes?
I'm looking at the footnotes. It doesn't really help me all that much. What's the Rebbe saying here? Shemen Lamaor. I don't know exactly what he's going for over there. But that was standing. I'm going to look into that a little bit later. But he's saying that, okay, basically it comes out from here, what was the nature of this new description of this miracle? That it was a nace that had something together with its opposite. Eish v'or neros tavim, which means what do you have? You had, I see what he's saying there. He's saying, even if you want to say, I gotcha. Even if you want to say that it was, in the example of that the oil was miraculous quantity, it still had to burn like oil. In other words, shemen zayizach means pure olive oil, right? Okay, so it had to be from the olive. Let's say we can get away from the fact that Hashem created something that looked like olive oil. It still has to fulfill the second half of that verse, which is shemen lama'or, which means it has to be light, which is capable of burning and shining naturally, right? Even if you say it's supernatural oil, right? It still has to have the properties of being able to burn like normal olive oil burns, right? So he's not trying to emphasize that the miracle was greater in quantity, but he's saying that no matter what we look at it, there was a facet of this miracle where it was just simply regular olive oil that had to burn, right? Because that's one of the conditions of the candle. You know what he's trying to say here is we can't say that the oil was such that the candle just like sort of stood on there miraculously without consuming the oil, because that's one way you could explain if the oil did not go down because they came back in the morning, they found it still full. Maybe you could say the flame just sort of stood there without actually consuming anything. So it was entirely supernatural. There was no process of combustion taking place. But he says, even according to the miracle, the description of the miracle we said before, that there was an increase in quantity where it was miraculous oil, it still has to fulfill the criteria of shemen lama'or, which means it has to be combustible oil. So now that we've switched over to this idea that the oil never went down, we're still not taking away the quality that there has to be combustion taking place, which means there is two opposite things going on. There's combustion, right? It is burning the oil away, and it's simultaneously not burning the oil away. We don't want to just say that the flame was sort of just like miraculously sitting on the wick without doing its natural job. That's what he was getting at there. Sorry about that. So what do you have? Eish v'or neros tivim. You have natural fire, haboy mishemen kedoma, which comes from oil or the like, right? Gormim b'achrech lekilion hashemen. And when you have a natural combustion scenario going on, you are going to create a necessity of consuming the oil. It should go down. Kan mitzad sheni, but in this case, the way we're explaining the miracle anew, lo chaser me'u min hashemen, nothing was consumed from the oil. So it was combustion and not combustion at the exact same time. Just like when Hashem showed Moshe the burning bush. It was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. So there was a process of consuming the wood and not consuming the wood at the same time. Just like now. It was being destroyed, the oil was being consumed and not being consumed at the same time. And what is this? This brings out a phraseology, right, which is used often in Chassidus for like the highest level of Hashem's powers. Nimna hanimnoyos. What does nimna means? To withhold, right? And basically, and nimnoyos is withholdings, like things that can be withheld. So we say nimna hanimnoyos. We're saying anything that can be withheld, any limitation, we're withholding all limitations. Another way of saying is no holds barred, right? So when do we usually use this type of language? Is when we say that Hashem can basically perform two opposite functions at the same time, right? He could be like Ein Sof and Ein Od Milvado, and there's nothing else but him, and the world is there at the same time, and these two things somehow do not contradict each other. You can have space and no space. right? And this is sort of like that goes on the level of the essence of Hashem, where He is simultaneously infinite and finite at the same time. It's like kind of a famous Indian from the Maharal of Prague, that he was like sort of I believe the first one to sort of clearly state this idea that if you say Hashem is infinite, you're actually limiting Him, right? Which becomes like sort of a feature of Chabad Hasidus. How are you limiting Hashem if you're saying He's infinite? Right, that seems like a contradiction in terms in its own right, because you're saying if you're relegating Hashem to only being able to be infinite, so you're sort of giving Him a limitation. His limitation is to be infinite, right? So therefore if Hashem is truly unlimited, then you have to say He's also not infinite, right? Which is a strange thing to all of a sudden assign to Hashem the power to be limited. Nonetheless, if He is truly nimna hanimnoyos, you're holding back all potential limitations, then even infinity is a certain limitation, which we have to say He does not bear, and therefore He can be finite as well. So you have to say He's finite and infinite at the same time. That's the true God, so to speak. This was from this angle that the Rebbe Rashab said, if I knew Him, I would be Him. You cannot understand that.
Is that just because like by process of like of logic, like a finiteness is inclusive in an all-encompassing infiniteness?
No, it's...
Or is it just because of the limitation of...
No, it's actually the opposite of that, right? Finite, in the so to speak, nature of infinite, you cannot have a finite entity, right? It would be negated and like something, it's zero. In other words, value is zero, because inside of infinite it doesn't take up any place. So that's the problem. It's like infinite is so big and so grand, it's only missing one thing, the ability to be finite.
Can Hashem make a rock that's too heavy for Him to pick up?
Right, so in this case, the answer is yes, right?
But wouldn't that be limiting Him in a way?
No. But it's limiting Him to say that He can't. That's, in other words, right? It's actually limiting Him to say that He can't.
Limiting Him to say that He can.
But the idea is, no, it's not really limiting Him to say that He can, because it's a self-limitation, right? If Hashem limits Himself, so then it's something that He's in control of. It's not something that's beyond His control.
But
so
he can put conditions on things. Like He can make a rock and say, "I will not pick up this rock." Therefore, he's
changing His will.
I'll give you the best example on earth, and it's very, very practical and very important for us. Right? I've gone through this little metaphor before, but I like sort of brought it to memory because it's so awesome to remember this. It was in Yud Shvat, the 5th year after the Rebbe took his reign, and he explained that there's this idea of why did Hashem make us do mitzvahs in the first place, right? He could have just sustained the world without us having to work for it. And the idea is that it's something called bread of shame. It's not really good. Hashem is good, and His nature is to do good, right? Teva hatov laheitiv. That's what the Arizal says. Midrashim, it's the nature of good to do good. So therefore, He wants to do true good. He has to make us work for our money, so to speak, for our sustenance, because if you just receive everything on the dole, as they say in Australia, right? Yeah. You basically wind up with like scummy, bad feelings about yourself. You didn't earn anything.
Bogans.
Right? Yeah, they have a name for those people, right? So, what is the name for those people? Bogans. Okay. Anyway, see, because you don't want to be a bogan, right? So Hashem didn't want to create a bunch of bogans. So what did He do? He made us have to do mitzvahs, so we like work for our sustenance. But then there's another part. There's a part 2 of that, which is what? If you tell a guy, this bogan, you say, you know what? I don't want you to be a. Wait, is it like a curse word? If you tell this guy,
it's like half derogatory.
Okay, so if you tell this guy, right? If you tell him, you know what? I don't want you to be this half derogatory thing. Go work and start digging holes for me because He'll give you something to do. So I'll pay you for digging holes. And he finds out years later, you didn't need any holes. Your mom has made him do this work so he would think that he was working for his living. But the reality is you made him work so he wouldn't have bread of shame. It's even more shameful in the end when he finds out that there was nothing to his work. So the same thing is true for Hashem's mitzvahs. If He gave us mitzvahs, and we're a finite being, how can we affect an infinite being? The whole concept of mitzvahs makes no sense. You think you're going to put your left shoe on after your right shoe and then tie it first and then tie your right shoe and somehow you've like made a difference in the world? It seems ridiculous, right? All the mitzvahs. What can you do with a mitzvah? You're going to put on tefillin. Honestly, what difference did it make, right? So the truth is, you cannot affect an infinite being, but Hashem has a problem here because He wants us to work for He gave us the mitzvahs, do a job for me. And it's like, you'll earn your keep. But if we find out later that our mitzvahs actually were meaningless and they didn't actually change Hashem, that would be the ultimate insult. And so Hashem put a self-limitation on himself. He made a emezdika move on himself that what a finite Jew does with his tefillin actually affects the infinite. Now, he made that happen, right? And it's real. In other words, when you do a mitzvah, you literally affect the infinite God. It's not because, naturally speaking, finite has any effect on infinity. It's because God, who is all powerful, can put self-limitations. That's what it means. If he can make a rock that he can't lift. You could say it's not because he's powerless to do that. It's because he actually empowered himself to have a limit, to put a limitation on himself, right? If you say that there's no such thing as a rock he can't lift, on one hand, you've made him, so to speak, super powerful. There's nothing he can't do, but you've made it so that he can't do that, right? He can't put his own self-limitation on himself. Anyway, I hope that was clear. So the point is, you have these two opposite factors. Yeah.
It's also like the rock is part of him as well. Like it's like he breathed himself into us. So it's almost like his self-limitation into us to do what he needs us to do. It's almost like him doing it for himself.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that. The point is, it's still, but however you look at it, he made himself somehow that the finite, can affect the infinite, which shouldn't really be. If it's truly infinite, the definition is infinite, is not affected by the finite, right? But because he's nimna hanimnoyos, there's nothing he can't do. He could even make it that the infinite is affected by the finite. Okay, so anyway, this is what we're seeing with this oil. It's burning and not burning at the same time. The notion is that you have two things that really cannot go together because of Hashem's power to fuse these opposites. Then he put that level of himself into this miracle, which is already something remarkable, right? If you want to say that there is miraculous quantity or quality, those are miracles that Hashem made, but they did not draw upon his ability to be simultaneously two things at once, which comes from his very essence, right? Infinite is already awesome. Finite is already awesome. So the increase in quantity and increase in quality, those are already the individual powers of Hashem. But to have them at the same time taking place, that doesn't come from a particular revelation or aspect of Hashem. That can only come from Hashem himself. So he put that into this miracle. That's what sort of jumps it up to holiday status. So we just answered that question. Why it's uniquely made a holiday, because it's not a regular miracle. Comes from the highest place. And where do we see this classically? I gave you 5 different examples, which were all the wrong ones. The Rebbe says, Makom Aron Eino Min Amida, right? The real place where this is usually described is when it says the place of the ark takes up no space, right? So what's the concept over here? Let's say this is the Holy of Holies, right? This is the dimensions of the where the Ark of the Covenant is sitting right in the middle of it. And it says, like, from here to here is 10 amos, right? In the Mishkan, at least, right? So, and the ark is 2.5 amos wide. But when they would measure from one side of the ark to the wall, they would come up with 5. And they would measure from this side of the ark to the wall, they would also come up with 5. Which means they've already counted for the entire width of the room, and the ark is not in it. Which means the ark doesn't take up any space. At the same time, when they actually measure the ark, they found that it was 2.5. Right? So what we had here is an identifiable, measurable object of 2.5, and simultaneously that measurable, identifiable object was not there. So what you have here is something which exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Where was this happening? We find it, the burning bush, right? Moshe Rabbeinu's like immediate, where what does Hashem say? Remove your shoes because you're on holy ground. It was basically the origin of the Holy of Holies and the actual Holy of Holies, right? The central, most divine space on earth that the whole universe is surrounding around it. The temple sits on top of it. This is like the peak pinnacle of Judaism. What's happening in that space? Space and no space at the same time. And we call this Makom Ha'aron, the place of the Aron, Eino Min Hamida. It doesn't take up part of the measurement. So this is essentially Hashem's essence revealed in that spot.
This It reminds me of this thing in physics that's like superposition, where something is and at the same time isn't.
Yeah.
And as soon as there's an observer who measures it, like the electron has to like materialize into either one or the other.
Right.
And I know also there's like the miracle of Baba Saleh where he had to hide the bottle because the only way that it could work is there wasn't an observer to like see. But here there's a difference where it's like we're still measuring, we're still observing,
Right.
and yet the miracle is still
Right.
happening. So it's almost like
Right. Usually the essence has to stay concealed.
right.
The Hanukkah miracle is that the essence itself came out. Right? So you could see it. Yeah. Anyway, so what do we have here? Makom ha'aron einu min hamida shayu shnei hafachim bebas achas. You had two opposites at the same time. La'aron haisamida. The ark actually did have a measurement. As the Torah says, it was 2.5 amos by etc. V'yachadim zos hayam makom einu min hamida. And together with this, the whole thing didn't take up any space. Yeah.
I'm a little confused because like I thought we were also trying to identify that like it's a hidush in some sort of way.
Yeah.
So
A
like,
chiddush in the terms of the miracle of light. In other words,
Yeah.
we never had a miracle with light like this before.
okay, because we've got two examples, the Aron Kodesh and the
Right.
burning bush.
Right.
So
So
like there's consumption without consumption.
the idea is that
and
what,
there's opposite without with opposites being
right. So the burning bush, I guess you could say, was sort of like a one-time sort of dash into the world, introduction between God and Moshe to like maybe elicit Moshe's mission. That's where Moshe took on his mission of becoming eventually the Redeemer. The Holy of Holies, there's no holiday to mark it, so to speak, because it's like marked continuously in space, right? So this is a holiday. The idea of a holiday is that we're like marking on the calendar, I guess, in time that there's remembrance of this type of miracle. So yeah, in a certain sense, we do have evidence of a miracle like this before, but I guess it wasn't shy to make a holiday out of such a thing because it was sitting there all the time. It was every holiday that we have was a pilgrimage to that space, right? Yeah.
I have a question because it wasn't it a problem that like is you can't pour too much oil. So if there's leftover oil the next day, like it consumes and doesn't consume at the same time, there's still oil after the burning, right?
It doesn't say you're not allowed to have leftover oil. It just says you have to have full measures and have to have the right amount that it would burn down. In other words, seemingly you could leave the oil in the next day. It is as long as it was the right amount.
But
and it was full.
If there's leftover oil, doesn't that mean there was too much oil for that single day of burning into the leftover?
Not really, because it was natural. We're going to soon see. It was the fact that it was burning naturally. I mean, it was just natural, regular oil. It wasn't some kind of. Why would we say there's too much? Because the nature of the oil changed to becoming an oil that naturally burns slower. So therefore, day one, you have 8 times too much oil in there.
Right.
But in this case, we're saying there was nothing special about this oil. It was just straight up simple old olive oil, and it was burning naturally. It was simultaneously not burning naturally. Right? It was two opposites happening at the same time. So you didn't have this problem that there was an improper amount of supercharged oil, because it wasn't. It was just regular oil.
So there wasn't enough oil, but there was still like that oil that stayed there.
There's no problem with using the same oil you used yesterday, as long as it fills all the criteria, right?
It was still olive oil. It was the right measure from the day before. It hadn't changed, and it was being consumed.
It was the right amount to burn,
Yeah,
right? That you're supposed to put in.
that day, and it was also being consumed at the normal rate that it would have normally.
Yeah,
Just wasn't.
it's just crazy. He answers all the questions and introduces this whole like mamish crazy like reality of a new miracle. Like honestly, this mamish a brilliant like situation on our hands, right? And mind you, no one ever even realized that all the other answers throughout history. But the Rebbe's writing this like what? This like 60s. When is this coming from?
Yeah.
This is a sicha from. Excuse me, I'm just all excited about it. But it's a sicha from 1975, combined with a sicha from 1966. So basically, from the story of Chanuka until 1966, no one figured out that we'd have no idea what this miracle is, right? We have opinions in the post scheme and everything, telling us different opinions. Turns out neither of them make sense. This is the only one that makes sense. Why? Because Mamash Chassidus is a revelation of the future, which comes and shows us like wondrous mystical things and makes like connections and fusions between all contradictions that previously existed by showing us that very quality of the Ein Sof, which is Nimna HaNimnois. That's the whole. Where do you hear about like something two opposites happening at the same time, revealing the essence? It's just something that the seventh generation of Chabad Hasidus is all about revealing, and here they reveal it again, solving all the problems of the past. It's not normal. Like if you like sit on this for a second, you just like sign me up. You know what I mean?
But it's normal, and it's not normal at the same
Right, exactly. It's nothing could be more sensible, right? That's the funny thing. It's like the most logical thing, and it's like impossible. Very well said. Okay, so going on to chapter Hey. We sort of answered all the questions here and finished the sicha, but we'll go inside. So the miracle happens specifically between these two opposites taking place together. There's something much deeper here. Oh, I think he's going to tell us right now what's unique about Chanuka over that miracle, like your question. So he says, when it comes to the place of the Aron, which was taking place and not taking place, right? All you're really emphasizing here is that there was two opposite things. Mida, the Eino Mina Mida. There was measure and no measure at the same time. Eliyoser mikach, ha'inin shel Eino Mina Mida, nava davka mikach, sha'aron haya bal midos mesuyamos. No, maybe he's not going to make a distinction. He's just deepening the concept, right? So you have over here measure and not measure, but the concept here is much deeper than that, because you have the notion of not measure. In other words, the miraculous part, where suddenly like this thing like disappears and takes up no space. I would say that's the miraculous part. That was a derivative and flowed out specifically from the fact that the Aron did have an actual finite measure, which was exactly according to the Torah's description. Meaning, ilu lo haya Aron b'noi b'midos meduyakos mefurash b'Torah, which means if you would have made the Aron wrong in accordance with the measurements of the Torah, it was supposed to be 2.5 amos wide. If you made it 2 3/4, right? So you made the finite part not finite really in accordance with the finite description of the Torah. Lo hasabo kedushas Aron. It wouldn't have had the holiness of the Aron, and therefore it would have just taken up space, and you had a natural object without sort of summoning the supernatural properties that come along with it. Since you would not have had the holiness of the Aron by its finiteness, you would not have had the supernaturalness of God's presence there.
So
right?
It had to be.
So by the way, there's an immediate sort of like connection to us, right? It's not just that Hashem says I can be affected by the finite. General finite. Because what is general finite? You know what general finite is? Not finite. Because if you want to say, well, Hashem can be affected by the finite, so I'm just gonna like rub two sticks together and that's finite. No, that's not finite enough, because Hashem said it's exactly the 613 mitzvahs, and exactly as they're kept in like the right time and the right place, with all the different, flares of halacha and different opinions and so forth. Like this minhag versus that one, you have to do it in such a way where you mamish finite yourself completely. It's not a theoretical finite, is the point, and it's the same thing is true, for example, with let's say, like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? You can say God can dwell in man, right? But because he can be finite. But no, it's actually a finite one. It's a nation. It's not just the thought of a concept of a nation. It's this nation. It's this land, right? And so too, it has to be exactly 2.5 amos wide. If you want to really tap into Hashem's finite, then suddenly you access the infinite.
So like if someone wanted to make it take less space, and thought, let's make it a bit shorter,
yeah.
it would actually take up more space.
That's it. Now it takes up space. It's natural.
It's like when we're trying to do things, like if we're thinking, I'm going to save some time doing this, but if actually I don't respect the mitzvah,
that's exactly right.
I'm actually missing out on a miracle that it would be actually this, not working on Shabbos would actually make me more money.
100%. They say like a person, there's this notion of ganva apum machatarta Rahmana Karya, which means a thief who stands on the edge of his cave screams out to God to help him. What's it talking about? A thief, they would dig underground and pop up in the house of people because they didn't have floors back then. So this is how you stole, right? If you're looking for tips, you can also find that in the Gemara. And so there would be also Jewish thieves, right? And so the Jewish thief, the difference between a non-Jewish thief and a Jewish thief is the Jew makes his tunnel, but before he goes in, he says, please Hashem, may I be successful, right? Because he knows he's not going to be successful without Hashem. But this is called, like, not internalizing your faith. And the Rebbe says that this is something like a Jew who rushes through davening. In other words, how do you relate this to yourself? You say, I'll quickly rush through davening so I can start my day. But exactly what you said, you're going to try and shorten your time. You made it so you didn't daven. Now you don't have the miraculous power of the tefillah to affect your whole world and so forth. So yeah, it's about keeping Hashem's finite rules, Even though it seems ridiculous, why I have to tie my shoes this way? I could get to the shul faster if I didn't have to think about tying my shoes this way. No, you lost the infinite. You lost the kedusha.
I have a story.
You've got a story.
Really quick one.
Everybody's got a story. All right, go with it, man.
Okay, so
Story time.
I wanted to wake up early, and I was trying to figure out how to wake up early so I could go to shul on time. And so I quickly went. I think got dressed, like did the brachas, did everything I needed to do. Had a smoke, had a coffee, did everything I needed to do. Went and had a shower, and then when I came to my back door, my back sliding door in our house, it came off the rails and it locked. And I could not open the door to get to my room. So I was like trying for like 5-10 minutes, trying to get this door unlocked. And finally it unstuck. After I called my little sister to come help me from the other side. And she and I, like, we got the door unstuck. And I was frantic, like, oh, I'm going to be late to shul, I got on my car and I drove to shul, and I was exactly on time.
Thank you, Hashem.
Okay, so last paragraph here, right before Vav, it's in page 201. It says, "B'doma lekach gam b'neis Chanukah." We find something very similar in the miracle of Chanukah. According to this opinion that we're bringing now, hanes yisrachish dafka agdei kach sheidliku es neros b'mikdash kahalacha. Right? It must be that they lit the Chanukah candles exactly according to the law, right? They couldn't like chintz out on having a little bit less of the measure or more than it should burn in a day, right? Because that would not have elicited the supernatural nature of this miracle. Since the menorah has to come from actual oil, right? From an olive. Right, and it has to be natural olive oil. Shekila be'esh kedleil. It has to be shemen lemaor, which means it has to be oil that actually burns down and makes light like a normal oil, natural. Yotzei aneshel matzu aneros meleim shemen. It comes out that they came back and they saw the candles full the next morning, which means shelo nigra shemen. It means the shemen was not diminished. It only could come about if there simultaneously the oil was being consumed. Because if the oil wasn't being consumed, they weren't doing the halacha of the menorah properly, and it would be like making the aron a foot shorter, right? It would not have created the miracle. So it's specifically the fact that it wasn't being consumed was a derivative of the fact that it was being consumed. In other words, you can't explain this any other way than two exact opposite things happening, because if you would tamper with the finite quality of it being just a regular old piece of oil burning, you would have lost the ability for it to be supernatural. So it's literally two opposite things at the same exact time. Vav. And now there's another point that the Rebbe makes, which is going to take us into actually a very awesome sort of life lesson. It's a very beautiful life lesson. We actually sort of threw it out in another class. I told you we were going to learn it in different sicha. You'll see when we get there. So he says, in order to understand this unique way of describing the miracle, which is basically the Rebbe's chiddush, right? You're never going to see Chanukah any other way again. You could thank the Rebbe for that. And he says to explain why this type of miracle had its connection with Chanukah specifically, right? Why did we get a revelation of Nimna HaNimnoyos and Mamash, the essence of God over there in Chanukah miracle? What's the connection? Because not every miracle has this type of high-level business going on. So now we have to understand the unique difference between each one of the explanations of the miracle that we've been through so far, right? Which is basically Aleph Beis Gimel. One is an additional amount, right? Quantity of oil. Two, Tosefes Be'echos Hashem, and two is the difference in the quality of the oil. And the third one is a fusion of two opposites, combustion and non-combustion at the same time. So in other words, to see what each one of those types of miracles means, so to speak, like the philosophy behind it, then we'll understand why specifically the two opposites and that explanation is the right one for Hanukkah. When it comes to the first explanation, the miracle happens only at the first instant, right? Meaning, kasher Hashem nosaf b'neis. We're talking about the first one is the Indian of the additional quantity. When does the miracle take place, right? When the oil is miraculously increased. But once the oil is miraculously increased, right, from that point on, it just becomes natural oil which burns like any other oil. It burns in the proper time, in the proper way. In other words, in every way, it's natural after the miracle happened in the beginning. Right? You increased the oil. That was amazing. Thank you. But now there's nothing you can notice in the burning of this oil that's taking place, which is unnatural. Amnam nes shemen kach ladlaka ki luli hashemen anisi lo haya bamet lahadlik es neros hamikdash. He says, nonetheless, the miracle of the oil is still connected with the lighting. In other words, even if the miracle happened and now it's a natural event, which are seemingly disconnected from each other, they're not totally disconnected, because if you didn't have this miracle in the beginning, if you didn't have miraculous oil, then you'd have nothing to light. Nothing would, in other words, so the basis of the thing was a miracle. The continuation is not miraculous, other than the fact that it's sort of sitting on a basis of miracle. But that is itself a connection. Right? Because if there wasn't some miracle in the beginning of this, then there'd be nothing to light. But if so, it comes out that it's true that the lighting the menorah with this oil is connected with a miracle, but nonetheless, but the miracle is not openly seen when the candle is lighting. There's no hint or recognition of any miracle that took place when the actual candles are burning. If you walk into the Beis HaMikdash, you don't see anything that's miraculous at all, right? The hocha misha eni yodea mahu makar Hashem and eni yodea misrach hashneis. Right, it's exactly what I just was saying. The proof is someone who doesn't know the source of this oil would not be excited about watching the menorah burn like it was just like any other day. Whereas, in the second way of the miracle taking place, which was Dolekes kamus Hashem haktana zman memushach harbe yosem min hateva, you see that the oil is burning much, much slower than it normally would. This is like the candle of Rivka and Sarah. Hanes nika bisman habeira. You can notice the miracle while the candle is burning. So someone could come in if they have a few minutes on their hand, right? They could see. Wait a second, this is not a normal fire. What happened to this oil? In other words, the miracle is not happening right now. The miracle still happened in such a way that it changed the nature of the oil. But all the while the candle is burning, you can see that a miracle took place. So if you walk into the room, when the candles are burning, you will still have the impression that there was a miracle that happened here. Unlike the first one, if you didn't know that a miracle took place in the beginning, you'd never know there was a miracle at all. But still, it's not the miracle that you're seeing right now. It's just the result of the miracle that you can see at the time of the burning of the candles. Where the miracle itself already took place when Hashem changed the nature of the oil one time, and a one-time deal in the beginning. It's just that one-time deal in the beginning stayed, so to speak, and made an impression throughout the actual burning of the candle during the day. So the natural process, you can witness it's something strange going on. I mean, it's still a natural process. It's just a natural process happening to miraculous oil that you can see even when the candles are burning. Unlike the first one, you can see no miracle whatsoever. Only in the third explanation, which is nimna hanimnoyos, which is this notion of a miracle happening that it's burning and it's not burning at the same time. There's the notion that there's a miracle happening at every second. Right? So there's no way to miss the miracle. You walk in there, you say, this is a miracle in front of my eyes. It's happening right now. Not a miracle happened before and I don't even know about it. It was swallowed up and I can't see it at all. Or not even a miracle happened before and I can see evidence of it. You walk into the Chanuka story the way the Rebbe is explaining it, and for 8 straight days, you're watching a miracle continuously take place. Big difference. Zion. So he says, Shlosha Ufanim Shel Kabbalas Ol Mesiras Nefesh. So this is now going to relate to Avodas Hashem. 3 different ways of what we call Kabbalas Ol and Mesiras Nefesh, taking on the yoke of heaven and having self-sacrifice. These are unique qualities that come from like sort of the essence of the soul, both of them. To have Kabbalas Ol and to do the mitzvahs even though you don't understand them, right? That requires something which taps into something which is beyond your intellect. So it's like a deeper supra-intellectual powers. And certainly to have actual self-sacrifice and to like die for Hashem, obviously you have to override your whole system and tap into some essential Jewish power, right? So there's 3 ways of relating to that special Jewish part of yourself. Shlosha Ufanim Shel Nes, the 3 different ways of understanding the miracle, like everything in Torah, also exists in Avodas Hashem, right? It exists in Avodas Hashem if you learn Chassidus, right? But everything in Torah, if you learn Chassidus properly, you can mamish translate every little single pasuk and halacha and holiday and story and miracle. Somehow it's relating to how you're supposed to work with God. He says, "Hevdel bein teva lebein nes ba'avodas ha'adam hu." What's the difference between nature and miracle in your own life, in your own service to God? Teva, Zoy Vodash Lifi Tam Vadas. Your nature part of yourself is your service, which is called intellectually sound. It's what we call in Hebrew Tam Vadas. You're doing things because it makes sense, which is basically most of your life, right? Usually your like modus operandi is you go along basically being a rational human being. In fact, that's sort of what like marks you as different from the animals. You conduct your life with reason and intellect. This actually winds up being a limited aspect of divine service because you're not going to do something if it doesn't make sense, right? So you basically limit your emotions, your reactions, your thought, speech, and action. Everything that you have is based on your intellect, and therefore whatever you're going to do is sort of limited to fit in with your nature, the way you see things. And therefore, you're never going to, so to speak, go out of yourself. You're going to always be contained. Now, you might be a genius, so you might have a broad, span of powers and so forth. Whatever your grasp on the world is, that's what the operating system you're going to be working in, and you're not going to be able to step out of your operating system, right? There could be like angelic ways of understanding reality or like subatomic particle reality. It's beyond your way of seeing the world, so it doesn't really help you on a daily basis that there could be something in its opposite at the same time because you don't see it. You're the observer. You trap it into a finite space. It's measurable. That's how you live your life. Whereas you have a nace. You're a yid. There's another part of you. You don't have to go according to your nature. And the miracle inside of you shows itself on an avoda of Kabbalah, soul, Mesiras Nefesh. This is what I was just trying to point out. The fact that you can do something and you have no idea why, right? Just follow the program. It doesn't make sense. On one hand, you're like a fool. You have to be careful you don't follow the wrong program with this power, right? But a yid, Baruch Hashem, our Kabbalah soul, it leans us sort of to accepting the one God and His Torah and mitzvahs. Right? And it's something that it's our emunah, it's our unique faith that basically we will accept Shabbos observance even though I have to close my shop and nothing's gonna, I'm not making any money on the busiest day of the week and so forth. It's something that shows it's like a miracle inside of you. And Mesiras Nefesh, for sure, right? The fact that you're willing to basically sacrifice yourself, that's completely beyond the nature. Right? Animals will not sacrifice themselves. They live in a realm of preserving their existence constantly. That is their nature. So the idea that you can act in a way which is beyond comprehension is the miracle inside of you. The miracle quality of your service to Hashem. Which means you don't take into account your particular will, right? That I want this. And certainly you don't take into account your limitations, your nature, the way you understand it, but rather you fulfill the will of Hashem. And even up until the point where it's going to like take your life if it has to, you're going to be willing to give your soul. I'm not, so you have inside of you both miracle and nature, right? I think we're going to hold here though. So we'll finish it up tomorrow. Nice. Yeah, we ran out of time.
Just a little bit left.
I know, but it's just enough for us to finish tomorrow. Bezrat Hashem.
It's kind of like the miracle of the 26th being invoked by the 24th, right?
Yeah. That's all.